Hello and welcome to episode 10 of the Rain Check podcast. I'm Austin,
I'm Donna.
and this week we will be discussing King Ethelred the Unready. I guess
And
just
his
yep,
second wife, Queen Emma.
okay, and some other women related to him. Is definitely going to come up. I guess I first wanted to start with his name. So he has one of the more unusual titles for a king. And basically, it's sort of what it sounds like, where he's just not ready for stuff that happens, which we'll get into. But the more literal definition is basically that the name Ethelred means well advised, like you have good, advisors telling you things, and or like well informed, and then unread meant ill informed. So he's it's his name is literally well informed, the poor informed, or
Right.
misinformed.
And I understand that nickname didn't really come into being until maybe 100 years later. So I don't think his
Hmm.
contemporaries necessarily called him that. But it is kind of funny that they would make that pun with his name.
Yeah, he probably wouldn't have been too happy if they'd called him that at the time. But yeah, I think
No.
at the time, I don't think he was like overly hated too much as a king. I mean, we can
Hmm.
debate it once we actually talk about it, but his reputation, I think, after the events that'll happen in the next couple decades, I think looking back on him, you see this is really where the Jenga tower starts falling down for like the Anglo-Saxons. Like it's kind of you can really put a lot of blame on him. Not fully, but
You can, but also I think I've read some people's comments that I think are make a good point, which is that it was during his reign that literacy really increased or increased just before then. So there were a lot more people that could read and write. And so
mhm.
his reign is much better documented than
Okay.
the previous reigns. And so, for
Right.
example, his father, his grandfather, Alfred the Great, they all paid game guild. Um, but
Mm.
for whatever reason, the historians seem to, and it was really the Victorians in the 1800s that started dissing Aethelred,
Really?
and kind of make it sound like, oh, he was so horrible, like he was so stupid. He kept paying these dang guilds instead of, doing what
Fighting.
he should be doing. But in actuality, his ancestors had all paid the dang guild as well. So I'm not really defending him because my tendency is to not like him very much, but I do think he's gotten a bit of a bad rap.
That is interesting because, yeah, I guess I am seeing maybe more of the surface level stuff about him. Definitely. I mean, yeah, it's not fully putting the blame on him directly, but I feel like the past kings, it didn't put as much emphasis on them paying the Dane Guild. Like, it would talk about battles they would fight and things like that and conquering territory, whereas for him, all you really read about is mainly losing battles and then paying them a bunch of money.
Yeah, it
I
doesn't
have it
seem
written
like
down.
he
I'll
was a
get to it
very,
eventually, but it is quite a bit of money.
and it doesn't seem like he was much of a warrior. Like, I
Yeah.
think most of the men in his family enjoyed going to battle, or at least did it well, generally
Hmm.
speaking. And he doesn't seem to have been either trained as a warrior as well or had as much aptitude for it or cared as much about it.
I remember in the Unruly book, which we bring up sometimes, he said that Ethelred was kind of, well, in one way, he was 100 years behind his time because I think the Danegeld thing had been even a bigger thing, like in the 800s or 900s when the Viking attacks
Hmm.
were going on. And one reason his father and grandfather hadn't had as much issues is there just weren't that many Viking attacks. He just sort of ended, he was in a time period where they were starting to pick up again. So he was
Hmm.
a little bit, he was going back to that old tradition of really going hard on the Dane Guild, paying them off. But then he said like 800 years ahead of his time in terms of being like a pacifist, like not wanting to fight, which was not
Well,
very popular at the time.
the other thing is that he was only between 10 and 12 when he took over because his stepbrother was murdered, possibly on the orders of his own mother, so that he could be king.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
feel like this sense of guilt was over his shoulders all the time. But also, I think the Vikings attacked his first year on the throne when he was only 11 or 12. And he obviously wasn't really the one that was ruling, it was his advisors, his
Hmm.
mom, and the Archbishop of Canterbury, and some other people. So, I mean, when you're like 10, 11, 12, 13, and other people are, I mean, I guess in one sense you could say when he got old enough he could have rejected that and done the opposite, but you can also say, well, okay, this is how I learned you're supposed to do it.
That's true. Yeah, he just kind of, that's what he was advised to do. I mean, he was poorly advised, as we know.
Hmm.
So actually, yeah, why don't we rewind? Speaking of all of that, so just to set the scene, he was born in the year 966. He's the younger son of King Edgar the Peaceful, who we obviously had discussed in the past, and his wife Efthrith, which was his third wife. And so he was not initially expected to inherit the throne because, because his older brother Edward was older. But then Edward gets killed, and that's when
Probably because of Aethelred's mother, who was not the mother of Edward.
right. So then um, right. So she wants her son to be king, as we had kind of discussed in the last episode. And so then he becomes king. And so it's almost like if you want to blame anyone, you could almost say like Aethrith kind of set the wheels in motion in terms of
Hmm.
if you really want to start at the beginning of the domino effect. It's sort of like
Hmm.
she kills. That's like the original sin is killing Edward, and then Ethelred becoming king, not paying off the Vikings. And anyway, let's go step by
I
step
do
through
want
his
to.
life
I just
before we
want to
get all
admit,
the.
I do have mixed emotions on that because I'm normally here to speak up for the women.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit hard to speak up for Ethelred's mother because the evidence does suggest, although there's no proof, that she had a hand, if not directly ordered, the killing of her stepson so that her son could become king. That's not a very nice thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, on the other hand, I guess if you're a woman in that society and your only way to have power is to do it through your husband or your son, and your husband is dead, then, that was her only way to have any influence was for her son
Mm-hmm.
to be king. So, I mean, I'm not surprised that she wanted her son to be king. Maybe she could have gone about it a different way.
Well, I mean, I think it's very feminist to just admit that some women can be evil. It's like I feel like it's kind of not feminist to be like all women
Hmm.
just do good things all the time and they're just perfect angels. 'Cause that's kind of dehumanizing, I feel like. But
Hmm.
anyway, um, actually, I have an image of Ephrath I have prepared for all you
Oh,
watching out there. So I found this online.
oh, no, 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 no. It's not her.
Yeah. Isn't she? I think she was the inspiration for the evil stepmother in Snow White.
I don't think so. No.
All
And
right.
I just saw in my notes something that's related a little bit, which is again we kind of blame Ethelred for the Danegil that he paid, and yes, he did pay a lot, as we'll talk about later. But his the former King Edgar, who I don't know was like his uncle or his I can't
His
remember if it
half
was his
brother.
grandfather or his uncle or his father. But Edgar, who everyone thought was amazing, had left a hefty war chest in his will, and the war chest was dedicated to buying off the heathen raiding army should the need arise, which
Mm-hmm.
just is another example of it was expected that it wasn't unusual that one way of dealing with the Viking raids was to pay them off.
I guess, yeah, maybe what I'll say for this is maybe it's just more of bad luck or something where it makes sense that, okay, the paying them off works for a while. They're attacking you because they just want to loot the country, so then you just give them money to get them to leave. You're like, okay, here's the loot. Bye bye. But then at a certain point, it makes sense that the Vikings would catch on and think, okay, well, cool. Like I'm just gonna do it again. you know, it's
Right. And then I also read, and I don't have enough detail to be fully conversant in it, but it was also just a matter of bad timing because separate and apart from Aethelred, it wasn't necessarily, I'm sure part of it was that Aethelred's a young boy. And that always is a time for the kingdom to have a weakness when your king is an adolescent. But also, the Vikings were having a lot of internal battling between the who was going to be king of Norway, who was going to be king of Denmark, and there was all this inner fighting for a long time. And
hmm
some of the decision to go raid England was related to these internal strife that was going on in the Viking homelands.
right, right, right. Yeah. So I think that's the thing is whether or not we want to sort of point our finger at Ethelred and be like, you, and blame him and be like, you did this. But it just, this was the time when you can see the Anglo Saxons kind of weakening and starting to crumble. And you can see the scene being set for what's going to happen. You see the pieces falling into place slowly. You see Normandy getting drawn into the picture, which we do need to get to. But before we moved away from Efrith, his mom, I had read something that I thought was pretty interesting. So she had originally first been married to Ethelwald, who is the son of Ethelstan Half King, who is a powerful nobleman, and so then basically the beauty of Efrith was reported to King Edgar. So this is Ethelred's dad, and Edgar was looking for a queen, and he sent this guy, or he sent Ethelwald to see Efrith, ordering him to offer her marriage to Edgar if her beauty was really equal to was really, as good as they reported. When she turned out to be just as beautiful as was said, Ethelwald married her for himself and reported back to Edgar that she was quite unsuitable. Edgar was eventually told of this and decided to repay Ethelwald's betrayal by saying that he would visit the woman, and then Ethelwald had like told Efrith to make herself as unattractive as possible for the king, but she did not do that, and she actually
Because
like
she
dressed
wanted
up.
to be queen.
She wanted to be queen. She's like, okay, sure. Yeah, makeup makes me look really bad. I'm gonna put more on. um, and then according to anyway, so then Edgar, one historian reports that Edgar was really into her, so he kills Ethelwald during a hunt. But then someone else says that maybe he just sent Ethelwald to Northumbria, where he was attacked and killed by outlaws. Either way,
Either
pretty
way,
brutal. He's like, actually, well, it's like kind of complicated because he sends him to report, and then the guy's so into her that he just marries her himself. So he's kind of doing a messed up thing, but then the king is even worse, and he's like, actually,
yep,
no, I am gonna marry her, and I'm gonna kill you.
yep,
But also, why are you gonna do that to the king of England? You're like, he wants to marry this woman, but I'm like, she must have been very attractive,
yep.
um, as seen in this picture. So yes,
It's
as
just
we
not her, to be clear.
he became so then Ethelred becomes king in 978. After his half brother Edward the Martyr is murdered at Corfe Castle, the Viking attacks resume after decades of relative peace. And then there's a big battle in 991
Before
where
we get to that,
okay.
and you may be planning to mention this later, but this is also when the Vikings, I think they had done it a little bit earlier, but they seem to really start saying, "Hey, we don't have to go to England, fight, and then take all of our plunder back to Norway or Denmark. We can just either settle here or we can go to Normandy, which is just across the English Channel, and we can like rest and recuperate and sell our
Mhm.
slaves and our goods there. And then we can just head back on over to England, which is just, less than a day's sail away. So this is when Normandy kind of started getting involved in the Vikings' plans.
Yeah, yeah, that is important to note. And also, I don't know if we've mentioned enough that a lot of the Vikings were actually based in Ireland or in Scotland. So they're not all just coming. I mean, there's kind of all these different groups, but yeah, some of them are the Danes or the Norse that are coming from there to attack, but the more kind of smaller attacks are just the Irish kings that are like
Mhm.
raiding. So anyway, is there anything else before we get to the Battle of Malden?
No.
So this tapestry, if you're watching, is actually uh, a picture, or I guess an embroidery. It's an embroidery of this battle that happened. I'm not sure really. I don't fully understand why they would want to remember this battle where it's the English losing to the. But either way, it's pretty cool looking, and it is found.
And why do they have the word pant embroidered above the
I don't know.
church? Or
I will say I Googled it and I found a couple different versions that looked similar but different. So it might be like a larger piece, and I
Mhm.
didn't look too into it, but it is a
Okay.
famous. So it got made, I think, in the 1990s. So in that battle, Ethelred is defeated, not permanently defeated, but his army loses the battle, and so he pays the Danegeld of, it says here, 10,000 Roman pounds of silver, which is 3,300 kilograms worth of silver, which is about 1.8 million euros in
That's
today.
a
So
lot.
that's a lot of money, but if you think about it, there's you always hear about governments being like, and this one thing they did was $1 billion. So it's hard to really say, but either way, it's a lot of money. And I know I think the leader of that battle was ooh, Olaf Tryggvason, and I looked into him, and he was a pretty interesting guy. He after this, he promised he would never return to England. I actually think I don't know if it was that battle, but he attacked it at some point during this period, and he did keep his promise, and he actually left to establish himself as king of Norway. And some of his Vikings entered King Ethelred's service as mercenaries, so that was part of the deal. And this sort of is the beginning of him becoming baptized and becoming really Christian. So then he starts baptizing and converting his people, and he apparently baptized Leif Erikson, who then
Oh,
takes a priest back with him to Greenland.
that's interesting. I
So
have
yeah,
another tidbit about this time period, this battle.
actually, wait, I have one more thing about Olaf
Okay.
before you do that.
Sure.
It was just I thought this was kind of cool. I mean, kind of sad, but basically, he Olaf then eventually loses another battle against Vikings back in like the homeland, and rather than wanting to get killed by someone, he jumps off his boat in full armor, so he basically drowns.
Drown.
But there's a lot of sagas, or some sagas, that basically suggest that he made his way to shore and maybe got rescued by another boat. But essentially, he was kind of the original Elvis Presley, where there were then all these sightings like in Rome and in like Jerusalem, and be like, "Oh, we saw Olaf." Like he was this like mythical kind of figure. But I
I
think we will
haven't
get more
heard
into
that.
like the Viking side of things next episode because we'll talk about Swin Forkbeard. So then we can talk more about their point of view. But
Okay. On that Battle of Malden, it was the Anglo-Saxon army was partially led by Elderman Brythnoth of Essex,
mm-hmm.
and some people say that the Vikings needed to cross a causeway that the Anglo-Saxons could have kept them from crossing, and if they couldn't cross the causeway, basically the battle would have gone to the Anglo-Saxons.
Mm-hmm.
But Berthnoth thought that it was the upstanding chivalric thing to do to allow them to cross the causeway in order for them to have a fair fight. So
Wow.
rather than just taking the victory, he let them cross without trying to stop them, and then he got killed in the battle and they lost. So
There's a lesson in there somewhere. He was a little
mhm.
too chivalric.
Yeah.
Um, okay, that's interesting. So then basically, yeah, there's several of these attacks. They win some, they lose some, but it's not going too well. And then jumping ahead to 1002 was the St. Bryce's Day Massacre. So this is when Ethelred starts getting paranoid and who knows all this going on, but he essentially commands that soldiers go around and kill local Danes. So like they're not really sure if they're super like they've been there for generations people or if they're more like recent immigrant Vikings, but probably a mixture of both I would assume. But yeah, that happens and he goes and they kill a bunch of the Danes and among the victims is the sister of Danish King Swin Forkbeard, which I did mention them earlier. If you're listening, you can start putting the pieces together. But that really makes Swin quite upset, which is reasonable. And I won't get into what happens quite yet, but the massacre happens. And then also in that
I,
same year, he marries Emma of Normandy.
okay, I have first something to say about the battle and the massacre.
Okay.
It was some argue that it wasn't a wholesale massacre of Danes throughout the England
Mm.
because the people in the Danelaw didn't seem to have that much of a reaction.
Hmm.
But they definitely targeted Oxford, which is a town I have a particular fondness for, not only because of the history of the university, but it's a cool little town and I have an interesting story we'll get to when we're talking about King Stephen.
Okay.
Um, but during this Battle of Malden, I'm sorry, this Bryce massacre, when they really went after the Vikings that were in Oxford, a bunch of the Vikings had sought refuge in a church,
Hmm.
and the Anglo Saxons burned down the church with the with the Vikings inside, and that's obviously not a great thing to set fire to a church to murder your enemy. And in
Hmm.
2008, archaeologists did an excavation at Oxford and they found a mass burial pit with the remains of 37 men of fighting age, all showing signs of a brutal, violent death, stab wounds, blunt trauma, and decapitation. Isotope analysis showed they ate a diet high in seafood consistent with a Scandinavian origin.
Okay, we
A
could just say
second
they're Scandinavian.
A second mass grave of 54 men was found nearby that they believe also was proof that those had died during that massacre.
Okay, interesting.
And now you've brought up Emma.
Yes,
So, first of all, before we talk about Emma, let's talk about Athelstan's first wife. We don't know her name.
Ethelred.
Uh,
Sorry,
well, maybe, but I don't think
you said
it's 100.
Athelstan, so I just
Oh, I'm sorry, Athelred's first wife. We don't know
yep.
her name. Um, so she had very little influence or power, but she had 10 children.
I said
Kind of
I read that his first wife was probably named Elfgifu, which it was like the
who
Jennifer
wasn't,
of her age.
like,
That was the
yeah,
most common
exactly.
woman's name.
Right. So many of them were named that name. And so she, like I said, she gave him many children, including many sons. So that was her main job, was to ensure there would be heirs, and she did that. But she's very invisible. No contemporary source names her or her father. She's one of the most obscure queens in English history.
Hmm.
Um, she probably got married in the mid 980s when he was pretty young in his reign. So she had six sons and at least four daughters, but she never was crowned, unlike her mother in law. Remember, Aethelred's mother was the first crowned queen of England, but
Yeah,
but
Elfrith. Yeah.
she didn't get that
Oh,
honor.
it's a shame.
And she,
Well, we didn't really say like she was the daughter, or maybe you did, but I missed it. But she was the daughter
no,
of the Duke of Normandy, because we had said
no,
they had
no,
kind of.
we're not talking about Emma yet.
I thought we were just talking about Emma.
No, no, no. We're talking about his first wife. Emma's his
Oh, his
second one.
first wife. Okay, sorry.
His first wife is the one we don't know her name. She had
She
the
doesn't get
10
crowned.
children,
Okay. We know a
six
lot
sons,
about her for not knowing anything about her, but okay.
right? Um, and she died giving birth to the 11th child. And so
Okay.
she died within the same year that his mother died, and right around the time of that St. Bryce's massacre. And so they were trying to decide, well, who should his second wife be? Because they wanted him to have another wife, even though he already had 10 children.
Well, I also saw that she might have just got set aside. Like she didn't even die, but he just really liked Emma, or he wanted the alliance with
I mean, I
Normandy.
guess that's possible. I haven't heard that. But some people in his council thought he should marry another Anglo Saxon woman for various reasons. But some thought, oh, you should make an alliance with Normandy. And so, as you were saying, the Duke of Normandy at the time, Richard, was letting the Vikings come and use his ports to refresh themselves or whatever, and it was making it
Yeah.
difficult for England. So they did agree to do an alliance, and Richard allowed or promised his sister, who was anywhere between the ages of 13 and 17, to
Hmm.
Aethelred, who was maybe in his late 30s or early 40s. So poor Emma had to
And
go.
honestly, at the
And
time, that's like the most normal royal marriage. I feel like that was very common.
yes, yes, but I just have to say, Emma
Mhm.
is one of my very favorite people. I read a trilogy
Wow.
about her,
Okay.
which I highly recommend, written by Patricia Bracewell. A Shadow in the Crown is the first one, which is about the time period where she's married to Aethelred.
Hmm.
And then her story is going to continue. And one reason we know a lot about her is because even though most women aren't written about, Emma's like, F that. I'm going to hire someone to write my story. So, just as
Nice.
some of these kings we know more about because they had chroniclers specifically assigned to write about them,
Hmm.
Emma paid a person to write her story. And this is later on in
Hmm.
her life. And when it's written, it doesn't have a single line about her marriage to Athelstan. It mentions that she was a queen, but nothing else about this time period. So she clearly tries to put this whole marriage behind her. And we'll,
I mean, it kind of makes sense because if you're coming from Normandy, it seems a lot nicer back then. It's on the mainland. There's not as many Viking attacks going on. They seem to be more allied with the Vikings. I mean, they sort of are offspring of Vikings. And then she's going to this, foggy island where she doesn't really speak the language, and they're not doing very well at this time. Things are probably less sophisticated than she's used to, and so that kind of makes sense that she's not very happy. Because apparently it had been the first marriage of an English king to a foreign bride since the 850s, which is 150 years before this.
yeah, so she comes into this situation with this man, they probably don't speak the same language. He's much older than her. He already has 10 children. And as
That's
I said, the
crazy.
queen's main job is to have heirs. Well, she doesn't really need to do that, but she does end up giving birth to two sons, which one of whom will be the last Anglo-Saxon king.
Oh wow.
Um,
Do you want me to read off all the kids?
sure.
So I don't know the ones you're referring to specifically, but I'll just say all this is all of the offspring of Aethelred the Unready. Athelstan, Ecbert, Edmund, Edred, Edwig, Edgar, Edgith, Elfgifu, Edward, Alfred, and Godgifu. So it's funny
And
now that we've been doing this podcast for a while, we've met. There basically been a king with almost all of those names that I just listed. They're all. I'm like, oh yeah, of course,
mhm,
Edwig and Edred. So those,
right.
yeah,
And
we
did you
like these.
mention Edward and Alfred?
Yeah. So then the last three listed are Edward, Alfred, and Godgifu. So that must be
Yeah,
the two
Edward and
sons.
Alfred are the
Yeah.
two with Emma, and the other one must be a daughter.
Yeah.
And part of the deal was this through this alliance with Emma was that her brother was supposed to no longer allow the Vikings to come to port in Normandy.
Right. Which apparently
So
did not
anyway,
really work.
it didn't really work that well. I mean, Richard didn't really care. He had several sisters, so whatever. Give a sister, and if I don't keep my promise and she suffers, who cares? So here's you
Yeah.
got this teenage queen in a foreign country and all these wars going on, and she probably had mixed loyalties, right? Because her ancestry is Viking,
Yeah.
and yeah. So anyway, she's a cool and powerful and smart
Hmm.
woman that I like a lot, and we'll be hearing about her for several episodes.
All right. And it is interesting. Like whenever you see someone famous, sometimes it's like, oh, like Emma, that's such a normal name. I almost wonder if that's sort of the original woman that a lot of people started naming their daughters after is like this Emma. I mean, I'm sure there were other
It's
Emmas before this,
it's
but
interest. Yeah, that is an interesting comment because I think I've already mentioned this, but she's the great aunt to William the Conqueror. And it's
Mhm.
through this alliance, this marriage of Emma to Athelstan, that William's able to claim his blood right to England because he
Mhm.
is related to Emma and Emma's son, who will
Yeah.
be King of England.
Yeah.
But William didn't name any of his daughters Emma, and none of his daughters named any of their daughters Emma. So it is interesting that some of these names, like Edward, which is another one of we've got King Edward
We
before,
have a
and I
lot
think
of
we'll have
Emmas.
another King Edward, and Emma are mixed in with all these names that we never hear of anymore.
And sometimes it makes sense. It's like, okay, like Ethelred. No, who's going to name their kid after Ethelred, So then, but maybe if he had done a really good job and saved England from the Vikings, maybe I'd be
Right.
named Ethelred.
Right. Yeah, he's the first and last king named Ethelred of England.
Hmm, interesting. So then, moving forward a little bit in the years 1009 to 1012, there are some devastating raids led by this guy Thorkel the Tall, and they pay him off with an enormous sum of 48,000 pounds of silver. And this is when Ethelred really starts getting stressed out and paranoid, and he doesn't really know what to do, so he starts um, firing a bunch of his advisors and getting new advisors,
Let's just
which kind of
stop for a
makes sense.
second. You had told us before about the 10,000 pounds equated to like 1.8 million euros.
Mm,
And now you're saying more than four times that amount, 48,000 pounds.
I know, so
So
it's
it's
probably
just
like
an
$5
immense,
million. Dollars.
yeah.
Yeah, and just think about how much like physical weight that is. Like imagine seeing all these boats just full of silver like sailing back to
Hmm.
Denmark. Um, yeah, so then this is when things are not doing well and they're about to get worse for the Anglo Saxons, I suppose. So this in 1013, is when Swin Forkbeard, who was the brother of one of the women who got killed in that massacre about a decade earlier, he invades. And what was rare about this was that he was one of the first Vikings that was intending to conquer England. He wasn't there to raid. He wasn't there to even maybe take like a little city in Ireland or something. Like he was going to try to take over England, and basically he succeeds. So Ethelred eventually flees to Normandy, and Swin is proclaimed king. And you got to remember that at this time, it wouldn't have been as shocking as, you know, if this happened like 500 or 800 years later, where it's like, oh my God, there's this totally different guy as the king. It's like there's a strong Viking presence that had been more established, but still, it's like they were a little bit more used to it. And overall, it does seem like the Vikings, as rulers, didn't really change their people that much. They were like, okay, I'm in charge, but you guys can keep doing what you're doing. I'm just the king now.
Just a
So,
little tidbit, which most people
mhm.
probably don't care about, but you
Okay.
said that Athelred fled to Normandy and also
Yeah.
his sons with Emma, Edward and Alfred. And
Hmm.
Emma, for some reason, fled to Flanders. Well, she did have relations in Flanders. Count Baldwin of Flanders was a relative. And so she stayed in Flanders for a while. And while she was there, the Count's daughter got to meet her and spend time with her. And the Count's daughter was Matilda, who marries William the Conqueror and later becomes Queen of England.
Okay. And I was also going to say that this next couple facts, I guess, that I'm about to say, we're definitely going to dig a lot more into. Essentially, the next couple years, we're going to have like several episodes that are only covering a couple years because next episode we'll talk about Swin Forkbeard because I just said he becomes king, but maybe I guess I have to spoil what happens. So he's only king for like 40 days or 50 days, and then he dies. So then Ethelred comes back and tries to become king again, but he's sort of facing off against Swin's son Canute, who is going to be the following episode. So we'll get deeper into all this stuff, but it is just kind of it is a weird situation where okay, Swin takes over, he's king, and if he had lived for like 10 more years, who knows like how that would have affected everything, but the
Mm-hmm.
fact that he died so quickly, it is sort of a strange like all right, well does that mean his son should become king or should we still have the same king that's still literally alive? He can just come back. And I do think that the popular consensus seemed to be the people of England were like, okay, we didn't love you. You made some mistakes. You weren't perfect. You had some bad advisors, but we'd love to have you back. You know, it's like we
Right.
did.
The
We
devil you know is better than the one you don't, I guess.
exactly. So, um, yeah. Anyway, we'll get more into the details, but there's a civil war. Like
Yeah,
Ethelred
but he
becomes king
didn't
again. There's a
last
civil
very
war with
long, right?
Canute. Say that again.
Ethel's Ethelred the Unready didn't last very long when he came back.
No. So he comes back for like a year or two, but in 1016 he dies in London, and so that means his son Edmund Ironside will continue the fight against Canute. And yeah, so just know that we have
And I
Ethel Red, and next episode we will talk about Swin, and we'll move from there. But
and I think Edmund the Ironside was a good guy and would have been a really good king.
okay.
And possibly he and Emma had crushes on one another because they were the same age. He was her
Hmm,
oldest stepson,
that's
but
kind of weird.
there's no really evidence one way or the other on that.
Okay. That's the After Dark
I,
episode of the
I
podcast.
like Edmund though.
Well, does I forget, does Edmund ever actually become king at any point or
I felt like he was king for a
I
minute
think he is.
because, yeah, so I think we'll have to research it for our next episode, but I think they were kind of fighting each other and they were both doing pretty well. And they decided, you know what, kind of like they had compromised in the past, where like, okay, you Viking can go do the Danelaw area, Northumbria, and me, the Anglo-Saxon, will be over here around Wessex and everything. I
Yeah,
think they reached a similar agreement where Edmund could have the
like
historically Anglo-Saxon
southern.
area and
Yeah,
Canute would have the Northumberland area.
I think that is right. Yeah.
And then Edmund ends up either being killed or dying. I think he dies of a wound that he suffered in one of his battles after a very short period of
I
time.
did, yeah, I did write this down. Essentially, the simplest way to say who was king, it goes Ethelred, Swen, Ethelred again, then Edmund, then Canute. That's what it
Yeah,
says.
although I do think that
It's more complicated
Edward,
than that.
Edmund, and Canute may have been kings at the same time.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yep. So this is a very tumultuous time where things are really starting to shift, and I honestly think that if things had gone differently, basically if Ethelred maybe had won more battles and fought off the Vikings, or if he hadn't, even marrying Emma in the short term was good to have the alliance, but that's what gives the Normans the legitimate claim to the throne. So it brings the Normans in. So if like a lot of that stuff hadn't happened, or maybe if he hadn't done the St. Brice's Day massacre and made Swin angry, like there's so many things that if had happened differently, like the entire lineage of English kings could have been completely different.
And one thing we mentioned briefly last episode, but we haven't really talked about this episode, is I feel like so much of Ethelred the Unready's reign was haunted by his depression and his guilt over something that wasn't his fault. You know, he was 10ish, and his mother may or may
Mm.
not have had his stepbrother killed for
His half
him to
brother.
benefit from it. And I believe that before he could be crowned king, they told him he needed to go and properly bury Edward the martyr's body because it had just been tossed aside when he was murdered.
Yeah.
And so he did, and he kind of almost worshipped his murdered half brother and would
Hmm.
like pay fealty to him and was like kind of almost bending over backwards to make sure he was sufficiently honored. And I
Yeah.
feel like the fact that he felt, even though it was through no fault of his own, maybe he never felt like he really deserved the position he had, and he
Yeah.
felt guilty about it. And I think maybe that kept him from really owning his position and
Like having
and
confidence.
taking control like he should have. That would have been better for everybody, which maybe is a lesson for all of us that, like just let that stuff go, come into your power
Hey, your
and
mom
go
murdered
for
your
it.
half brother. Just let it go, man. No, that is a good thing to keep in mind. I
Things
mean, all these
happen.
people would have like their lives are so different than ours, and like they would have had so many like what we would think of as like extremely traumatic things happen to them at like a very young age. And yeah, so um, that's important to keep in mind. And I was also gonna say that you got to think that religion, they were so religious at this time that he, I think, started to believe that all of this misfortune with the Vikings and all this stuff was related to this like original sin of
Mhm.
his mom killing his brother sort of thing. And so that I
Yeah.
think was one reason he was so like worshipful of his brother, was he thought like, okay, like I gotta make God happy because he clearly isn't very happy with me right now. And
Hmm.
I had looked up some just random fun facts because I realized we hadn't talked a ton about just like what was life like in England apart from like the kings and nobility. So
Hmm.
I'm not gonna do it this episode because I feel like we've already talked a lot, but I will share one thing I saw, which I had heard before, but since we're right around the year 1000, we crossed over. I wanted to note that we crossed over the 1,000 year mark. We switched into the new millennium on this episode, and just like with the year 2000 or with the year 2012, and it happens all the time now with all these different years. A lot of people thought the world was going to end in the year 1000. So
Hmm.
um, that's just something to keep in mind that
Yeah, I mean,
all
there's
this
a
stuff is
whole.
happening, and they literally think that God is going to end the world right now because it's the year
Yeah,
1000.
no, I haven't read it, but a guy I follow wrote a book about the millennium, the 1,000 year mark, and
Hmm.
how all over the world there were many, many people that were convinced that this is when Christ was coming back, or this is when the world was going to be destroyed, and how it impacted daily life. So you're right. I mean, we just
Yeah.
totally brushed over that, and I don't think the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles even mention this when it's talking about
Hmm.
Ethelred's reign, but it had to have some impact, and maybe it even in some way contributed to this St. Bryce's massacre. Maybe they're like, I don't know. Anyway, that's
Yeah, yeah,
complete
but
speculation, but
it's interesting because you see now with we like to think of our like modern society as being more logical than they were like in the year 1000, but even now on the internet you see so many people believing all this like really superstitious stuff. Like, you know, people really did think the world was ending in 2012 because the Mayan calendar ended. So you
Mhm.
got to think in the year 1000 when people are a little bit more willing to believe in like more supernatural stuff, that I'm sure it
Mhm.
was a very like it was a serious thing that people around town are like, all right, say goodbye to your loved ones, like this is it.
Right.
So I think that'd be kind of an interesting movie, like set it in like 999 and just kind of because that moment when like the world doesn't end and
Mhm.
everyone's like, oh, okay.
And we can have Prince's song playing in the background, party like it's
Mm,
1999.
1999. That would be good. All right. Well, hope you don't steal our idea out there. That we're gonna sell the rights to that.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us. Please follow us on Instagram at RainCheckPod. Uh, Apologies for not having an episode drop in I think 2 weeks, but we're gonna start trying to bank some episodes so that that doesn't happen. Or maybe I was actually considering
Mama
doing like
is
a
traveling right now. I'm
yes.
now in Menton, France, on the Côte d'Azur, and I was in
Okay.
Paris, and I'm going
Yeah.
back and forth all over the world, and we're dealing with time differences and all sorts of other things.
Yeah.
So excuse
You're
us.
dealing with a lot, and trust me, she told me how her day was, and it was very stressful and chaotic. So just be happy we got this one out, and I think it's a pretty good episode. And I actually was thinking about doing maybe like a special episode if we need to of like, okay, the year 1000, and just kind of talk about not
Yeah,
about
that would be
kings
fun.
if we need as like as a backup. But anyway, that's been another Rain Check podcast. I
See you
think
next
I
week.
think I want to end it with check please. I don't know. I can't figure out
I,
how I want to end.
I, I have no check for you. All
um
right.
anyway, all right. That's been another episode. Join us next time to learn about Swin Forkbeard. Goodbye.
Bye.